In December 2006, the UK are sent in to shock when over the course of just 10 days, the bodies of 5 different missing women are found. A police force are sent into frenzy while public fear grows, knowing that a killer may be amongst us. The town of Ipswich were being terrorized by someone, with a new body turning up every few days. All of these women were taken in similar circumstances, all found in similar circumstances, and clearly all the work of one perpetrator. But who was this mystery person? Well, this is the story of the Suffolk Strangler.
Right, before we get into this one, I just want to say this is a real case involving real people, and as we always promise you guys, we will always try and be sensitive and respectful of the victims and their families, because as we say, this happens to real people. We feel so sorry for them, especially bearing in mind there were 5 innocent women that lost their lives in this case. And before we get into this one properly, we just want to say thank you to every single one of you that have watched all of these videos, liked, comments, everything that you've done so far for us. We hugely appreciate it. Making these videos was a bit of a dream for Joey and I, and we have received so much support on all of these videos recently, so we thought it'd be nice to take a little moment out and say thank you so much. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what Suffolk was like at this time and why indeed we're even there. It's late 2006 and we are in Suffolk in the east of England. More specifically, we are actually in Ipswich. At the time, it was a relatively quiet place and where a lot of people said there wasn't a lot going on. But as we say, this was Christmas time, just before the end of the year. And so people were getting ready to go out, going for sort of parties and celebrations. And there was that sort of like, I suppose, whimsical time of the year, people enjoying themselves. Now, Ipswich is home to about 140,000 people. And as a result, it's one of the biggest towns in that part of East England and that sort of the country. Even so, the crime rate is much lower than big population centres in the UK. It's got about half the crime of Manchester, Leeds and London, for example, per capita. But like most places, there are darker areas and less reputable things going on. And in Ipswich, there is a red light district, and that is where we are going to start this story.
So on the 7th of November 2006, Suffolk police issue a statement expressing their concern for a local woman named Tanya Nicole. Now, Tanya hadn't been seen since a week earlier on October the 30th, and due to her ties with the red light district, with the fact that she was alleged to have worked in that area, her family were obviously quite concerned when they went that amount of time without hearing from her, with the context of the fact that her industry that she worked in did make her a vulnerable person. And around a week later, the public, specifically the members of the public from Ipswich, are really baffled and increasingly concerned when they hear of another missing woman from the same town, and the details being very similar. This time around, it was a 25-year-old woman named Gemma Adams, who had been reported missing by her boyfriend after not returning following one of her shifts. And the fact that Gemma was a working girl, and with the news of the other lady going missing, the family and the general public were obviously very concerned. So much so that one of Gemma's friends, who had been staying with her around that time, actually said that as soon as she did not come home that night, she knew that she had been murdered.
That's a good friend, to be fair, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people, and maybe even people in this case, weren't immediately reported missing.
No, exactly. Yeah. And that's something we'll get onto. But I think definitely with this case, the people around her acted very quickly. However, it's around 2 weeks after that, the 2nd of December 2006, Gemma's body's actually discovered within a water brook in the local area.
Yep.
And the discovery of Gemma's body was not only news that was grieved by her family, but also news that strikes fear into the family of Tanya Nicole, knowing that she has also gone missing in the same place under very similar circumstances. And it has since emerged that these two were actually friends. Did you know this?
I didn't know that. But do you know what I found really sad with this case? I've seen some interviews with the police. I don't know if you've come across this clip as well, where where basically they said, oh, you know, if one girl goes missing in this area, like we weren't that concerned. But as soon as there was a second girl that goes missing, that's when we started thinking there might be a pattern here. We really started looking into it and the police sprung into action. What a mad state of affairs that a policeman is just outwardly just admitting to that on an interview.
Yeah.
I found that so sad. And I think what we should do out of all of this, before we go into more details here, is each one of these women were real women that had their own lives, had their own friends. Yes, they had their own trauma and their own issues, but they were individuals that were often just grouped together. And I feel unfairly so. I don't think it's nice the way that they were described.
I always think, and I say it to you time in, time out, to predict the future, you must look into the past, right? If we look into the past, when it comes to serial killers, when it comes to anything like this, the section of society that have predominantly been most vulnerable in a lot of these high profile cases are the exact same section of society that the policeman in question there is almost writing off and almost saying, like, you know, that's what they do, they go missing. If one of them, it's not a problem if we spot a pattern or whatnot. And I do find that really unfair, because as much as there can be people that will look down their noses on people and whatnot, they are vulnerable people, right?
Totally.
They've got into that industry through being vulnerable people. So the fact that the police are then saying in the aftermath of it, you know, if one goes missing, we're not really, but when you start to see a pattern, it's not a great way, regardless of how you view the industry. It's not a great way to treat anyone of society.
No, we've got to try and protect these people, haven't we? It's such a shame. And this is the thing, right? So as you say, they were friends and they were known to each other in the local area. And this is where it gets worse from this point on, isn't it?
Yes, so both potential friends, both in the escort industry, both working in Ipswich in the red light district, and both vanish around the same time. One of the bodies has already been found, and you don't need to be a genius to know what comes next. Just 6 days later, on the 8th of December, the body of 19-year-old Tanya Nicole was found. Once again, Tanya is found in water, and if you needed any more convincing that these two cases were linked, Tanya was found in the same water that the previous woman had been found in, just 2 more miles upstream.
What we always try and do in these cases is try and find as much information about these victims as we possibly can. And I think what's clear in this case is that it was actually quite a struggle to piece their backstory all together. Like, it was difficult to sort of find first count evidence of what these people were like. But we do know about Tanya. She was very well liked. Her classmates said that she was a lovely young girl, very charismatic. But beyond that, we don't really know too much else, do we?
We don't. And I think it's important as well, we remember the time periods that we're going on in, because I think like the digital era is pretty much classed as like from the 90s onwards, basically. I don't see it as that. Do you know when I see it as?
Yeah, go on, tell me.
I see the digital era as kind of being 2005. And this is why I say 2005, right? The reason I link it specifically to 2005 was because it was the fact that that was when I went in to high school, right? But the reason being is because 2005 was the time that I could probably say from 2005 onwards, there was never a spell of more than like a month or two where I didn't have a mobile phone, right? And that for me spells it's the digital era. However, what we want to stress is that, you know, surveillance technology and all different types of technology have advanced so much from 2006. So although we were in that sort of digital era where it is able and probably easier to pinpoint a suspect, a killer, something like that, a lot more than it was 20 years ago, I think 20 years ago, it was still pretty difficult to do it. So I don't think that we were quite in the age we are now where, you know, number plate recognition, things like that can be so easily spotted. And therefore we can go, right, this is who we're narrowing in on. But what we did do is we looked up the words of a former school friend of Tanya Nicole, and she described her as being a lovely girl who had just fallen in with the wrong crowd. And her family have released a few statements since, one saying that Tanya was my beautiful niece. She was loved by all of our family. I just can't understand why some evil person would want to hurt her and her friend. I hope the police catch whoever did this soon. So that was a statement there read out before any suspect had been brought in and caught. And already the family there are saying, I hope the police catch whoever did this to her and her friend. So straight away, they're
linking the two together. So at this point, the red light district is pretty much closed down, isn't it? Like the police are telling people, don't go anywhere near this area. It's dangerous. You need to stop doing that. And basically, you need to sort of look after your safety.
Yeah. Especially for the women working in the area. And this is the thing that you've got to remember, because this will have come at huge frustration for those women. Also, like, you've got to remember, this is a job for them. So being told, no, you can't go to work now, probably, I would say most people would agree, the worst time of year to be going without money around Christmas. You know, you're seeing family, you want to make a good impression, you want to buy people presents, things like that. You don't want it to look like you're not doing well. I
think these are the type of people, they're just surviving as well. I think it's not even just about, you know, buying presents and that sort of thing. It's just keeping your head above water at some point. It's just to get by. So having a month off work, it's not as easy as some people can just do that. Like that could be a life or death situation for some people, to be fair. Yeah. 1 second, Joey. I just want to give you a bit of a compliment because recently you have been absolutely smashing it.
What do you mean?
You weren't expecting this at all. You've been getting videos out, you've been doing all the TikToks, and you've been looking after a brand new little one into the Joey Knight clan. I think you've been doing an amazing job.
What can I say, mate? I'm on it. But I tell you what, I do get a bit of help from our friends at Spacegoods. That is one thing that has been making me so much more productive than I had been in the months prior to starting using them.
Yep, and we love them because they don't just stop giving us support on the channel, and we are so grateful for that. And they have got a brand new product that we want to tell you about called Matcha Dust.
Yeah, that's the one that I've been using all the time, and the main reasons for that is it supports focus, mental performance, and energy all day.
Yeah, so inside this little beauty of tasty goodness, you have got lion's mane for focus, cordyceps for endurance, chaga for antioxidants, ashwagandha for chill, maca root for energy, and natural caffeine from the matcha itself. Plus, there's vitamin B5, which is all there to help you have less fatigue. Plus, it's vegan, cruelty-free, and has all natural ingredients inside. And it has a beautiful and light vanilla flavor. You can have it hot or cold, and if you're very fancy, you can even have it with milk because it usually just served with water. And the good news is if you use code JoeyJosh using the link in the description below, you'll get 20% off your Spacegoods order. And I know so many of you have made orders on Spacegoods, and we are so grateful for you guys supporting the people that support us. And before we go, don't forget the rainbow dust, which is there to give you natural energy and focus throughout the day. We love that stuff as well, and it comes in beautiful flavors like the chocolate flavor that we adore, as well as the ashra dust, which helps you get to sleep easier at night. And we've been getting a better night's sleep all round using that stuff as well. And remember, code Joey and Josh will also give you 20% off all of those. So go and check out Spacegoods. Thank you so much to them for sponsoring us, and thank you to all of you that support us to make this beautiful channel happen. Now let's get back into the video.
And speaking of life or death, 10 days into December, bearing in mind we've already had 2 bodies now found. 10 days into December, on December the 10th, police announced that a member of the public once again has found another body in a wooded area near to Ipswich. This would end up being the body of 24-year-old Anneli Alderton. Josh, why don't you tell me a little bit about Anneli Alderton?
Yeah, so by all accounts, what we've heard from the research is that she was a really good student, and she was actually quite academically gifted, and much like a lot of the victims in this case, fell in with the wrong crowd, started using substances, and her life took a turn really from that point on.
Do you know why people were saying, or when people were sort of putting a timeline into Anneli's sort of life, they said that the timing of her falling in with that crowd was directly linked with the death of her father.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, and this was in her sort of teenage years, I believe. So for a teenage girl, a woman of any age to go through that is something that's going to be gutting, is something that's going to take a real mental toll on you. And it's something that for a lot of people will make them want to sort of experiment with escapism, right?
Yep.
And, you know, we've got to be careful for YouTube, what we can and can't say. But I think that, you know, using substances, things like that, there's always and like you were saying there from the police, there's sort of a sneery way to look at it. Predominantly, most people that do and fall into this world didn't wake up one morning and think, I'll tell you what, I'm going to become an addict today. That's what I'm going to do. I was going to do a bit of shopping, but I'm going to go and become... Most people didn't do that. It's normally induced by people sustaining real periods of mental trauma and things like that. And therefore, that's why, much like with all of these women, you'll still get people from their past saying really nice things about them and speaking about them in such a highlight. Because
100%.
It's worth noting here, you know, and this is something that goes all the way back to the days of the Jack the Ripper case. It's worth noting here that these are people and you know, they have their stories too, and whether it's hard or not to find out the information about them, they're often looked at as a statistic in some of these cases, and that isn't the case, is it?
No, it isn't. And also, what we haven't said and what we must remember at this point is she left behind a 5-year-old son as well. And also, I don't know if you know this, but they actually, in the autopsy, this is horrible, sorry guys, you have to hear this, but she was actually 3 months pregnant at the time in which she was murdered as well. And again, apologies for you having to hear this as well, but this is a slightly different way in which she was found. Basically, her body was found, I don't know if you know this, in a cruciform position. So again, the previous 2 victims had been found in water. And so they were sort of, as we say, floating in water. This woman was laid out naked in a cruciform position.
And do you know what it felt like to me at the time? Because I remember this, right? I remember this going on. To me at the time, when the third woman was found, and because of it was very quick that we were actually given the details on how she was found and the position she was in and whatnot, that was when I thought, oh, okay, we've got a serial killer here.
Yeah.
They've got our attention. Now they're looking to really make a statement. And I think that the fear of this being a reoccurrent thing was only heightened, obviously.
We're talking about 8 days, 3 bodies in 8 days. So there are coincidences in life and in the world, but this just felt, and I remember it at the time as well, it didn't feel like a coincidence. There was something more going on here.
Well, there definitely is something going on here, isn't there? Because you've got 3 girls that have all gone missing from the same area. By the way, as we say, an area which I know, you know, we had spoke about a case that I think had happened in Ipswich before, and I said that Ipswich predominantly isn't the roughest of areas.
Was that Roy Whiting?
No. That was closer down here. I believe the Ipswich one may have been the crossbow cannibal.
Okay,
maybe
yeah,
it could have been. It could have been. I'm not sure.
I remember you getting some stick.
I remember getting some stick about.
Yeah.
And obviously, look, I understand. At the same time as that, I live in London. Do you know what I mean? So we in terms of like boroughs and stuff, I'm sure like there's a high crime rate in Ipswich. But I am speaking from a place of knowledge. I spent a lot of time in East Anglia and Suffolk as a kid, so I know that the towns and villages are very, very sparse.
I just want to sort of contextualise this because I've actually got the crime data because I did the research on this just to make sure that we weren't bullshitting last time, right? Ipswich is slightly above the average for the UK, but Suffolk as a county, of which Ipswich is in, is significantly lower.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's what I experienced.
Yeah.
Through my time growing up in these places because I spent a lot of time in these counties.
But when we're saying Ipswich is slightly above, we're talking about like 1 or 2 points. And as I said in the intro, it's half that of places like Leeds, Manchester, Bradford, Nottingham. There's a lot of other cities around the UK in which it's significantly less than.
Yeah.
So that's where you put it. So again, we look at this and you know, we're contextualizing where we are in the world right now, but we look at it as a leafier, more rural part of the world. And yes, it's a relatively big town, but it's quieter than most other areas.
Yeah. I think that's what we look at it in comparison as to, you know, some of the areas that we live and drive through and whatever and things like that. So it wasn't meant to cause any offence. But either way, regardless, they've gone missing from an area that's not a hotbed of crime, in my opinion, when it comes to UK standards. It's very clear. It doesn't take a genius to work out. These are all linked. And the police very clearly knew this because on the 11th of December 2006, they give a press conference and announce that they are fearful fearful for 2 other women who they believe to be missing and understand worked in the red light district. These 2 women are Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols. And on the 12th of December 2006, 2 more bodies are found near Wasteland in Ipswich. The 2 bodies are later confirmed to be those of Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols. Now, this is one of the things that I found most bizarre about this case. What a tragic coincidence that this was, right? And that is that Paula Clennell, just 2 days before she went missing, did an interview with local media outlets, but it actually ended up allegedly on ITV News. Did you know about this?
I didn't know about this, but I had heard that one of the victims had spoken on TV, and now it all sort of gets pieced together.
Yeah, so there's an image that we'll be able to show you where the victim has obviously got her hood up, she has got her back to camera, and she is speaking to the reporter. She actually states that she and other working girls on the street were, in her words, a bit worried getting into cars due to the ongoing situation. But she also stated that she needed the money to fund her substance addiction. And she mentioned that when she heard about Gemma Adams' murder, it had made her feel physically sick. So we're literally talking about a woman speaking about a suspect that would go on to end the life of that woman. It's got to be one of the most tragically ironic coincidences in any of the true crime cases we've covered, hasn't it?
It's just gutting. And also, like, is there a duty of care for the people in the media to try and protect these women and try and get them out of these situations at that time? Like, do they have some responsibility? Bearing in mind, yes, she was anonymized, but still obviously in a very vulnerable position to try and protect them, you know, maybe not give them money, maybe give them shelter, look after them in some way. Because what I find the most tragic part of this is the police had made it very clear that this was a very dangerous area and that they shouldn't be operating in this area because there was someone that was obviously out there doing horrible things. And I think because of the women's situation at this time, they were forced to continue their lifestyle. Yep. They were forced to continue, you know, to find the substances, but also just to pay their way in life. They were having to continue to do this. And to say in that interview, most hauntingly more than anything, I'm worried to get into cars. That's exactly the way in which she was taken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Awful. So it's a really haunting interview when you look back on that.
Now, just to go back to Annette for a second, she was one of the oldest victims, I believe. I think she was 29 years old.
I think that would make her the oldest out of the 5, yeah.
Yeah, and this was the worst part of this is obviously that she'd left behind an 8-year-old son as well, I think it was.
It's tragic.
So she's also left, you know, another family member, and as we've heard earlier on, this isn't the last time that had happened. This one breaks my heart, actually, because she had actually already gone on a training course at this time. She was on a 4-year training course. Was it to be a teacher?
Yeah. No, it's a beautician. Beautician. So it's a 4-year training course. We used to do, when I told you I used to go to college, innit?
Yeah.
So there was like, actually, I know people that used to do that beauty course. It's hard. It's not an easy course. Like that beautician course is hard, like, because there's so many different things that you got to be doing. Like if you was to work, my sister used to run a beautician's. If you was to work in one, there's so many things you need to be able to do. So actually 4 years sounds like a long time. And you think, well, hold on, I could become a plumber in 2. Honestly, you got to learn so much there. Actually, like it takes a lot of commitment. And that shows that even though she was still a vulnerable person, I don't know if you've mentioned before or not, she was still an addict at this time.
She was, yeah.
But there was definitely the possibility of better days on the horizon.
She was trying to better herself, and that is the worst part of this. And again, just to make it clear here, her body was also found in that cruciform position in a very similar way. So again, people have posited that this could be potentially a serial killer covering his tracks, making out that this was some sort of crime to distract people from their actual intentions. But for me, this feels like a pattern and someone that was celebrating their crimes, that was getting a kick out of it.
Very much so. And it was after the bodies were found, obviously, that more details were actually able to come to light for us. Now, usually in a normal case, you'll have a body is found, you might have a suspect, you might have to go through lines of inquiry to get to that suspect. And while you're doing that, at the same time, the body will be being examined, right? And you'll be finding out how this person has, fatally come to an end, right? And the fact that we're dealing with, as I say, an area who aren't specifically probably day in, day out dealing with murders. I don't think they're dealing with 5 in the space of 10 days and having to do autopsies on them, regardless of what anyone says about crime rates there. They're definitely not doing that. So we're dealing with a police force that might not be equipped enough to be able to really, really nail this in a short amount of time. And therefore, autopsies are going on, examinations are going on. And it's only after that 5th body is found that we start to realise that there is even more of a pattern here. And that pattern is not just, the ways that the bodies were positioned in and whatnot. It mostly comes to the way that the bodies were found and the injuries that they're sustained, and most of those being around the neck, right? That was clearly the point of contact in which the perpetrator was using.
Yeah, they were asphyxiated. That was the way in which they were murdered. And there's so much so that the media then jumps on this straight away, and they coined this serial killer to be the Suffolk Strangler. And that is where the sort of, I suppose, the notoriety of the case became even more than it already was, because it was national news at this point. There's an interview, I don't know if you've seen this, with a Sky News reporter where he thought he was going there for a day, but he was actually told, go there for a week because this is going to be a massive case that is going to have sort of, national news coverage. So, the media knew that this was going to be a big deal, and they very much exacerbated the interest around this case.
Also, another thing that we found out in this amount of time, and this was, again, all these things are key because you're trying to build a potential criminal profile on someone. So as many clues as they can give you are completely necessary. And obviously some of those clues will come from the bodies of the women. And one of the things that we found was that these women were more or less all discovered in what the police were called dumping sites.
Jesus
rather
Christ.
Than actually murder sites.
Yeah.
And what they mean by that is there's nothing there forensically to link the crime being carried out there. You would imagine there would be blood splatterings. You would imagine there would be fibers, things like that, signs of a struggle. There wasn't. So we're now under the impression that the women could have been killed elsewhere and then taken to these places.
And what we should say as well is these dumping sites are all within, which is, can I also just say, horrible term, are within a very small area. Like, it's a very compact area that people are searching. And I think this at this time of year, there was a lot of flooding around the area as well, which made sort of like accessing that sort of those sort of areas quite difficult as well. And also, this is why they might have been dumped in water to start off with, because there was this flooding risk that was going on at the time. So yeah, it was very much like that.
I think as well, but point of obviously you could bury a body and whatnot, but in terms of trying to make it harder to find you.
I don't think the perpetrator gave a fuck about burying those bodies. I think he wanted them to be found.
Yeah.
The way that they were displayed.
Well, that's what I mean. However, to long out the process of it, as we found from looking through recent true crime cases, the actual hardest ones in terms of deterioration and whatnot, and therefore a lot of the time it's dental records, things like that. The hardest ones are often victims that have been left in water to identify.
It is, but that also does depend on the temperature. Because at this time of year, it would be quite cold. And so, there would be more forensic evidence than otherwise have found. But this is a big moment in the case, because now we're going to fast forward to the 18th of December, right? There's this 37-year-old man. His name's Tom Stevens. I don't think you know that much about Tom Stevens. Can I tell you a little bit more about him?
I know a little bit, but I feel like you've got a whole lot more information. Can I tell you?
This blew my mind.
Just in a nutshell, what I know about Tom Stevens, and this won't spoil anything. He was a punter.
Yeah,
he was a punter of the red light district, and he was known to the women. He knew the women and whatnot.
So this is the thing. I couldn't believe the amount of information that I found out about this guy that was it just blew my mind. Basically, he was a 37-year-old supermarket worker, and I'm going to use that term very loosely because he was doing a lot of other stuff at the same time, right? He actually called the police. Do you know this? He actually called the police first, before he was arrested.
Right.
Right. And he said to them that he had concerns that he could be wrongfully arrested for the murders. Wrongfully arrested and accused, right? But
this, to me, just quickly, sounds like the hallmarks of how a killer gets himself caught.
He also said to them that he had fears of having a split personality that caused him to commit terrible acts without remembering them, leading to him to feel that he had to hand himself in. So I don't know if you know this, but he actually handed himself in and he wasn't arrested by the police.
That's fucking mad.
It is mad.
That is mad. So I knew that he was a punter, right? Yeah. And what I knew was this, that I didn't realise that he had rung the police himself. Yeah. I thought that he had been brought in for questioning. But what I knew was that he had admitted to sleeping with 5 out of 5 women, hadn't he? Right?
He knew the women very well.
Yeah.
He knew that. Not only that, though, not only in terms of sleeping with them, he had an unofficial relationship with a lot of them. Do you know this?
No.
He saw himself, and I don't know if the women saw him in this way. He saw himself as a bit of a guardian angel of these women. He called himself the unofficial taxi driver for these women. He would take them to the shops. He would look after them. He would drive them around. He knew all of them that well.
I mean, it's not a guardian angel, is it? Really?
Not at all.
My guardian angel's never paid me for sex.
No, not at all. I think he wanted to feel as close to as he possibly could to these women, so that they would like him more. I think he was trying to do everything he could so that these women would love him.
And do you think that is a sort of boredom element of wanting to immerse yourself in the case? Do you think he was genuinely concerned? Because let's be honest, right? If you've admitted to sleeping with all 5 women that have been found, you're a suspect. You're a suspect.
A huge suspect. So much so that they actually did arrest him. They kept him in custody for 96 hours, and also he's kind of confessing, isn't he? As well, right? So not only has he got all of these sort of like reasons to be connected to the case, he's actually sort of saying, I could be part of this. I've got moments in which I don't remember what I was going to say. So the police had to prove that it wasn't him.
Well, he also had no alibi.
Yeah.
So there's no alibi for the nights of these crimes. And obviously, being that he was the guardian angel of these women, right? Why would you not have an alibi? Because the chances in my head would be, if you weren't with one of them who turned up, unalive somewhere, you were probably with another one. And they could probably vouch for you. Yeah. So it's really alarming that on 5 occasions you've not had an alibi as to where you are.
Yeah.
That's alarming.
It is alarming. And so much so that the police took this incredibly seriously. As you say, 96 hours is very unusual in terms of British crime. You usually let out far quicker than that. But the fact is they then used DNA evidence, and by all accounts, there wasn't enough DNA evidence linking him to the victims. So basically the police proved that he wasn't part of it.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, his DNA wasn't on the victims. They searched his vehicle and his home, and they found plenty of DNA. Yep. None of the victims in there, despite the fact that he had said, I'm pretty sure I've had them all in there. So, yeah it's a mad one. However, right, as much as he's under suspicion, as much as the public are definitely starting to believe, okay, this will be the guy that's done it, the next day,
yes,
a 48-year-old man named Steven Wright is arrested on suspicion of murdering all 5 women. So, Josh, why don't you tell me a bit about Steven Wright?
So Steven Wright was born on the 24th of August 1985 in Erpingham in Norfolk. So a bit further north than Ipswich, but sort of in that sort of general East Anglia area.
Want to know something?
Come on.
Very close to where I...
Really?
Where I used to be a lot in Norfolk.
Small world.
Yeah, it's right. Erpingham, I believe, is near Cromer, and that's not too far. And do you know what, right? So this is why I feel like I've got a little bit of an insight into things on this. The reason I always say that is because my parents had a gaff in Norfolk when I was younger. So I spent loads of summers in Norfolk. And this is obviously, as I say, very, very close to where this man was born. The one thing I could tell you about everyone around there, and Ipswich is obviously going to be different because it's a city rather than a village that is separated 7 miles from the next village. But do you know what the one similar personality trait that everyone there seems to have for me?
Go on.
Boredom.
Yeah.
There is fuck all going on up there most of the time.
Yeah, fair enough.
Do you know what I mean?
I'll tell you what wasn't boring was his upbringing. He had a very tumultuous upbringing, this Steven Wright. So let me tell you a little bit about that. He was the second of 4 children born to Conrad, his father, a military policeman, and his mother, Patricia, who was a veterinary nurse. His early years were described as incredibly unstable, as he constantly had to move because of his father's work. As a result, he actually lived in Malta and Singapore, as well as other places all around the UK. When he was just 6 years old, his mother actually left the family home, and she later alleged that the relationship with Conrad was very violent indeed. Conrad was known as being an incredibly strict disciplinarian for his kids and was known to be very violent towards them, including Steven. So the difficult upbringing paired with the frequent moves caused Steven to become increasingly shy and withdrawn, making it difficult for him to settle and form friendships. Steven left school in 1974 at the age of 16 without any qualifications. He then quickly joined the Merchant Navy after that and worked as a chef on ferries and later a steward on the very famous ocean liner, the QE2. So we're in the 1980s around this time. You can imagine he's going from port to port, he's traveling the world. There's been some interviews where people have talked about Steven during this time and basically said that there was something about him that wasn't quite right. He had this sort of smile going on where he was, he knew something that the others didn't know. Do you know what I mean? There's something about that. And his character wasn't the best character. Have you heard a bit more about his backgrounds?
I mean, I've heard that he could at times have an unnerving presence about him. But then I've also heard people speak about him in a lot of ways that could be seen as derogatory. But one thing I would say is wouldn't be seen in line of how you would talk about, a serial killer, for example.
He was known as a womanizer, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But also there were accusations that he'd used sex workers when he was travelling from port to port as well. And obviously, when you go to these ports all around the world, they usually drop you off in areas that might not be the nicest areas of where you're going to be going.
Yeah.
So there's probably red light districts and that sort of thing around it.
I mean, we learnt this from doing the Amy Bradley case, mate. Like a lot of people that were working in these areas at these sort of times did frequent bars that, went on to be found out to be brothels.
100%. And it wasn't just that he was dealing with. He was also known to be a bit of a substance abuser at this time. And also a heavy drinker. He was known as an alcoholic.
I actually got told as well that he was a heavy gambler. And this was something, once again, he had got in debt over.
Large debts.
Once again, it does bring me back to, and this was the reason, I don't mean any offence here, but it brings me back to that thing of boredom, right? I feel like a lot of the time you're chasing the high with someone that is, into gambling. They're chasing that buzz. They're chasing a buzz that their day-to-day life just can't recreate.
Yeah.
And the concerning thing is, when people finally find it feels sick to call it this, but, their purpose almost that can recreate this, as we're seeing in these cases, they often have sort of dire consequences of the lengths that these people will go to get that buzz.
Yeah, he was an addictive personality for sure. And so much so he actually struggled to pin down a job after this point. I've heard he actually had a few different jobs. I heard he worked as a lorry driver, a barman, and also a dock worker as well. But he couldn't, what was clear is that he couldn't really keep hold of any of these jobs. So then we get to 2004. He moves to Ipswich with his partner, who, this is also a bit of a weird one, was also called Mrs. Wright, but they weren't married. Did you know this?
Yes,
she was called Pamela Wright, the same surname, but they had no relation to each other.
Yeah. I've worked that out when looking into it. But to be fair, I mean, Wright's a pretty common surname in the UK.
It is, but also, can you imagine bringing someone to a party and going, "Oh, this is Pamela Wright," and they go, "Oh, you married?" And no, you just got the same.
I think as a bride's father, I'd be pretty happy about it.
Yeah, it'd be pretty easy. Yeah,
now you need to have a boy. You continue the family name. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in 2006, they moved from where they were in Ipswich to a place called London Road. Right. Now, London Road is at the heart of the red light district. Now, what this got me thinking, and I want to ask you a question on this. If you know that this is not the best area, do you think there was some premeditation from him at this time to go, oh, I like these sort of areas. I'm a Lothario. I like using sex workers. I'm going to go and live in London Road.
It would look. It would have crossed his mind. Let's not pretend that
weird,
he doesn't.
though,
Let's
isn't
not
it?
pretend that he doesn't know this area, hasn't frequented this area, doesn't know some of the workers in this area before he even moves there.
Yeah.
Because that would be a lie to say that he didn't know the area. So clearly, it would have come across his thought pattern. Did he move there with the intention on doing that? I don't know. I don't know. But that's something that I think we'll have a bit of discussion about as the case goes on.
So basically, they were like ships in the night, him and Pamela. You know, they had very different lives. And I think as a result, their relationship kind of broke down a little bit because they weren't seeing each other. You know, it's like if your ship's in the night, you're not going to build a relationship. You're not going to go out with each other. You have a very different sort of lifestyle, don't you?
They say absence makes the heart grow fonder. I'm not really sure I believe in that at that sort of age. I feel like you want to be with your partner, you want to be settled and whatnot. And again, that boredom thing of not having someone there in the house with you could have been a sort of motivation that the police were looking at in these early stages.
Yeah, 100%. So look, I'm getting now to the end of Steven's story, but let me tell you a little bit more about him as well. Did you know he actually tried to end his life twice?
I did,
Yeah,
yes.
so he'd already tried to end his life once in 1994, once in 2000. And also, had you heard about what his ex-wives had said about him in relationships as well? Because we haven't said this, he actually had 2 ex-wives at this point when we get into the 2000s around this case. Have you heard what they said about him?
Tell me, what did they say?
Basically, they said that he was abusive, violent, so much so that one of his ex-wives, Diane, actually said that he had tried to assault her with a knife. And also, they had a set of neighbours that lived near them at the time, and they had seen him strangle Diane as well. So just absolutely awful. But at this point, we don't really have anything that links Stephen to these crimes, right? He had no criminal record other than a theft charge in which he stole some money. I think it was 80 quid from work.
Yep.
He actually was arrested for that at the time. He wasn't sent to prison.
No,
but he
obviously
got a community service.
I think it was many moons ago by this point.
It was a long point. But he also wasn't arrested for any of the accusations that I've just said. So none of the violence. He didn't have a violent criminal record, is what I'm trying to say. So there wasn't any sort of
not a record. Doesn't mean
But a record is the key thing in terms of determining, potential suspects.
I think in any case that involves domestic abuse, I think that you're always going to have to look at the fact that, a lot of the time there's significant coercion going on here. So just because someone doesn't have a criminal record definitely doesn't mean they're without any crimes in their name, does it?
So why did they suspect him then?
Well, you spoke earlier about the neighbours, didn't you? Right? And obviously the neighbours had an indication of the shift patterns between Stephen and his missus and the fact that they weren't always together and whatnot. But one thing that the neighbours found very, very strange was around this period when the women are going missing and women are being found and whatnot, multiple neighbours reported seeing him clean his car at very odd hours, sometimes the early hours of the morning. Now, obviously, you might use the fact that his missus does a night shift and I'm a little bit nocturnal and whatnot, but that is a bit strange.
Well, he's not nocturnal because he works a day shift. So that doesn't make any sense. Now, I'm also going to blow your mind with another fact about this, because do you remember the person that we implicated earlier on? Another name called Stevens.
Yeah.
Right? Do you remember him? Tom Stevens. He, as I said at the time, called himself the self-appointed guardian. When he was confessing to all of these crimes and in with the police, he also said that there was someone else that they should be looking into. Have you heard about this?
He didn't implicate Steven Wright, surely.
He was able to identify the car, so much so that he actually was able to identify the registration plate of the car.
Yes.
Which was actually a key point in the case to identify who it could potentially be.
Well, that registration plate was caught on CCTV in the red light definitively at the time that 3 out of the 5 women were said to have been taken. So look, he lived in the red light area.
He did.
So there's a call it an alibi. There's a reason why your car could be in there. At the same time, We're not talking about his car being spotted on the driveway, him
No.
cleaning it. We're talking about being spotted driving around the red light area.
Cruising,
It
people
blows my mind that it was Stevens
Yes,
before
Tom
that had been
Stevens.
arrested. Tom Stevens, that was the one that gave the police the number plate. I
and
never
also
knew that.
confessed to the crime to start off with. So yeah, the Tom Stevens element of this case for me is the most baffling element of it. I find it really crazy. So what happened from that point on? Did they actually go and arrest him straight away?
Well, as we said many moons ago, Stephen had a prior conviction for petty theft, basically. And it actually surprised me because of the time period and the fact that it was said to be a historic conviction, that when he was arrested for that theft case, do you know what happened to him?
Was he DNA swabbed?
He had a DNA sample swab taken from him. And therefore, when the bodies of these women were being examined, his DNA had already come up as a match, right? But the complex sort of issue is the industry that they were in here. And that means that multiple men's DNA could be found on one of these women's body, and it's not an implication of guilt or of having any information
It's
as to what
not
happened.
the end of the case, but I would say it was part of identifying him as being part of the case.
What I'm trying to say is if you found his DNA on one, I don't think that with his number plate being in the area is enough for me to be confident that you've got the right man and you're going to get a conviction on this man, basically. If you find it on two, you're starting to really get somewhere with things, aren't you?
Yeah.
So if you find it on all five, you're probably looking at the man that's involved, aren't you?
Yeah, 100%.
Well, Steven Wright was told that his DNA was found on these women. And as a result of this, he actually changed his story and admitted to having intercourse with 4 out of the 5 women, but denied having any involvement in their murders. Following this, though, forensic experts went on to find distinctive microscopic fibres from Wright's clothing, his home, and the carpet of his car on all 5 victims' bodies. Meaning that on the 21st of December 2006, Steven Wright was charged with all 5 murders.
So Wright appeared before magistrates on the 22nd of December 2006, where he was reprimanded and put into custody. It was at Ipswich Crown Court then on the 1st of May 2007 when he formally submitted his plea, and he pled, can you believe this, not guilty. I couldn't believe that he pled not guilty. So again, as we always see in these cases, the family then have to go and listen to the trial. They have to hear all of the evidence, and it must have been incredibly traumatic. Steven Wright's trial then begins at Ipswich Crown Court on January the 16th, 2008. I couldn't believe, by the way, how long that was between the two things. So we're talking about December 2006 all the way till January the 16th, 2008. It feels like quite a long time to get to trial, but maybe I'm just reading into this a bit too much. The prosecution went through all of the evidence that they had to go to the conviction. That included the DNA evidence, and actually it was DNA evidence found on 3 of the bodies. The 2 that were submerged within water, they weren't able to actually find DNA evidence directly from him on those bodies because they'd been submerged in water.
No.
But what they were able to find on all of the bodies were the fibre evidence, as you said, from the car and from his clothing. And as I said, they found them on all 5 of the victims' bodies, which was a clear indication that he had been with them and they had been in the vehicle. There was also blood evidence, tiny specks of blood, in fact, that were found matching the victims of Paula Clennell and Annette Nichols. They were discovered on one of his coats. And basically, Paula Clennell's blood was also found in the back seat of Wright's car as well. And then there was all of the circumstantial evidence as well, the Ford Mondeo being on CCTV in the red light district at that time. Now, the defence basically said that Wright conceded that the DNA evidence was his and that it basically belonged to him and his vehicle. But he argued that the scientific evidence proved nothing more than Wright was a known user of sex workers during that time. And he had admitted to the court that he had been using sex workers for a prolonged period of time. Now, during the entire trial, Wright was noted as being incredibly sort of like nondescript, disassociated from everyone, and didn't really seem to be remorseful of the crimes at all. In fact, he didn't really give any answers really during the trial. In fact, when he was talking to police in the interviews, he gave a lot of no comments, and in the trial he didn't really assist with the questioning, didn't really go into detail about why he would be innocent either.
Even to the point where, to this very day, due to that fact that he gave so little in terms of explanation, the families still don't actually know how
really what happened. Yeah, it's really sad. So then the jury go to their deliberations, and they were composed of 9 men and 3 women, and deliberated for basically about 8 hours, and they came back unanimously of a guilty verdict on all 5 counts of the murder. So at this point, he was sentenced by the judge to a whole life tariff, and because there are consecutive victims and murders, he will actually get life in prison. He won't be allowed to have any parole. He'll never get out of prison. He'll be in prison for the rest of his natural life. The judge at the time, in his closing remarks, actually said that this was a targeted campaign for murder, and justified that whole life tariff with saying that there was a substantial degree of premeditation and planning. And he concluded that it was right that Wright would spend his entire natural life in prison.
100%, but that's not quite the end of the story with this one, is it? And the reason I say that is because this has been a case that, since I can remember, has been one that people have speculated hugely about, and not so much actually about the individuals involved in this specific murder spree and this specific case, but more so criminology experts, things like that, have speculated heavily about the possibility that Wright has further victims. Now, obviously, you might look at other missing person statistics and stuff like that from maybe local counties. It wouldn't have had to have been Suffolk, and you could tie the two together and whatnot. And because there are so many unsolved disappearances and potential murders, especially within this field of work, there's always going to be women that will be linked to Steven Wright, and people will suspect could have encountered Steven Wright. However, there was never really anything too concrete on any of these claims until the 22nd of May, 2024, when Steven Wright is pulled out of his cell and charged with the murder and kidnap of 17-year-old Victoria Hall in 1999.
So who's Victoria Hall?
Victoria Hall was a girl that went on a night out clubbing, basically, with a friend in Ipswich, where Steven was living at the time in 1999. She had left the nightclub with her friend. I think they'd gotten a takeaway or something like that. And on the way home, approximately around 2 a.m, they become separated. I think their houses are on, opposite streets or whatever. They become separated. And that's the last time that Victoria Hall was ever seen after that. However, not long after that, once again, it's like these women, she's found in a sort of woodland area, a ditch, basically, unfortunately, deceased. And it was unsolved. It has never been solved, that murder.
So has this gone to court? And what evidence do they have on him, by the way?
Well, he appeared via video link from HMP Long Larton, where he's staying, in a court where he just pled not guilty to all charges, basically. At this moment in time, I've scoured the internet. I've tried as hard as I can. I can't find out what they have got against him, what evidence, what the suspicion is. However, at the same time, with the amount of disappearances that have been linked to him, and I've seen maybe 20 that have legs, that have validity. In terms of, like, if we're saying this girl went missing in the area that he lived in, I've seen at least 20 that have got just as much as that. However, he has not gone to court for one of them. And what does that tell you?
Go on.
They've got to have more evidence on him for this one than they have any of the other missing women that he's been accredited for.
Yeah, fine. Before we end this, I have also got to posit a potential other theory that is around this case. I don't know if you've heard this. There was a writer that basically said that they felt that Wright was an accomplice, that he wasn't the main instigator of the crimes, and that he wasn't the main perpetrator. The evidence that they used for this was that there were footprints around some of the deposit sites, and those footprints were not the same size shoe as Wright's. So for me, that doesn't quite add up. That doesn't quite make sense. So the writer that had said this basically said, there might have been someone else involved, and he was they called him like a patsy. Like he was just an accomplice in the crime and wasn't the main instigator of those crimes, and that someone might have gotten away with it.
Yeah. Potentially. There's always a potential. I don't really buy into that too much, though, if I'm being completely honest with you.
Yeah.
I think that the evidence is very much there against Steven Wright. Yeah. People that had known him in his earlier life had said that he could be a compulsive liar at times and be very convincing with that sort of unsettling presence and whatnot that people speak about. I think there's too much evidence there against him for there to have been any third-party involvement. And or despite his involvement, I should say. Yeah. And one of the things I'd say in terms of like the shoes being too small, listen, I'm no serial killer, yeah? I've not done anything bad, but if I was going to commit a crime, let's say, for example, it was in a muddy area that I could be dumping a body, a snowy area, probably going to stick on a pair of trainers that are too big for me, to be honest, or too small, potentially. Yeah. Probably am going to stick on a pair of size 12 trainers if I'm going to do that, to just go and do that. Like, do you know what I mean? It doesn't take the amount of preparation and... I hate to use the word in this circumstance, but intelligence to be able to come up with something like that is out of the ordinary for a serial killer. And this is one specific thing that we have to speak about here, because the police said that the way that... you spoke earlier on about the fact that you feel like he potentially wanted to be caught, don't you?
Yes, I do. I do feel that. With the amount of reoffending, and also this staging and the lack of burials and the lack of sort of covering your tracks in any way, bearing in mind how these poor women were actually found, I feel that there was an element of that. He wanted them to be discovered, seen. He wanted people to guess that they were ritualistic potentially as well, that there was something more to the crime. And I feel that he saw himself as a serial killer and gained satisfaction from that fact.
But in terms of the way that they were able to find him was through the DNA match, right? Normally in these cases, let's say, for example, you don't have a DNA match. Normally there'll be a witness sighting. There'll be hears of a struggle, a scream, something like that. There was none of that in any of these cases. And these were 5 women who from the first one onwards would have all been on high alert, right? Who knew that they were in a dangerous position. And therefore, for there to have not been any witness evidence to any of these things, police felt like they were dealing with someone who had likely done this before. So here's what I'm going to ask you. And this, again, is in theory. It could get thrown out of court for lack of evidence, right? Yeah. But if he ends up being convicted of the murder of Victoria Hall in 1999... Do you believe that this man had a 7-year call-off period?
No way. There'll be other victims for sure. And this is what you say earlier on. There's like 20 other people that have legs in terms of a reason that they could be involved. Yeah. Victims, potential new victims. I think this could easily be much more.
And there you go. So within our lifetime, potentially, this is just off the top of my head from the ones that I know. I could be missing someone out that I don't know. But within our lifetime, potentially, definitely within Steven Wright's lifetime, if this Victoria Hall charge goes through and he is found to be guilty of the murder in 1999, I think a whole lot more is about to come. I believe that could be the domino effect that sees this man brought to justice for multiple more murders. Personal opinion, I don't believe that he started this spree in 2006. No. I do believe that this man had committed murders before. Whether or not he was involved in the murder of Victoria Hall, I don't know. I would literally just be speculating. But what I do know is there will be a domino effect that comes into chain if this man is convicted. And what that means off the top of my head is that in our lifetime, he's probably going to have the highest count, maybe, horrible, of any UK-based serial killers in our lifetime.
And he's still around, is he? He's still in prison, still alive?
Yeah, still in prison, still alive, yeah. Oof. Yeah, never going to get out. And as I say, more charges potentially coming against him. Do we... I mean, look, right? The fact of going not guilty means that you're going to make the families, and in this case, multiple families, have to sit through the ins and outs of a prosecutor trying to prove, you know, someone's either innocence or guilt and whatnot. And that means that they're going to have to hear things that they would have rather not heard. They're going to have to find things out they would have rather not had to find out. And therefore, it does sort of bring me on to why wouldn't you just go guilty, right? You're not going to get off it. Why wouldn't you just go guilty? And that kind of leads us on to the motivations for these murders, because that's something we haven't discussed. And I do want to wrap it off, I should say, by rounding it up and you know, talking about those motivations.
Yep.
What were they?
I think this is one of those things where it's an amalgamation of a few things. And I think that together tells a story in terms of getting into his psyche. Now, what we'll say at this point is neither Joey nor I are psychologists, and neither Joey nor I knew this man in any way or were able to speak to him. But what we've done through this case is piece together a lot of evidence that we know about him. And I think there's a few things to bear in mind. For me, one of the starting things that you look at with a lot of serial killers, and if you've watched Mindhunter, this is a start of, you know, almost every case, is the childhood trauma. Now, I think his mother leaving him when he was incredibly young and leaving the family home was part of it. The way that his father was domineering, disciplinarian, and also potentially physically abusive, you know, both being violent is what I mean by that. You know, that sort of starts it off. And I feel that there's that then bleeds into, for me, the second thing, which is, I suppose, like the control and the excitement element of it as well, right? What people tend to do if they are not in control in their childhood is they value control in their adult years. So what he was wanting to do is, bearing in mind he didn't have control over his mother figure, he was trying to perceive control over these women, both in his relationships, because we talked about that earlier on, about how he was domineering and controlling over his relationships, but also for these victims as well. And that was an element of, you know, putting his own control. And obviously he got a kick out of it because he had an addictive personality, and his addiction had potentially gone to another level.
I think that's the thing that really, really resonates with me the most, is the addictive personality that you talk about. Mate, like, I know so many people in life that have addictive personalities and whatnot. And I always, I know it sounds negative, but I always think like, God, good job you never tried this, that, or
X,
the
Y, and
other.
Z,
you know what I mean? Because you've got this personality where you've got an addictive personality and whatnot. Now, when you fuse in someone who's not wired up right with that, then you can get dire consequences. And I do think, like you said, it is a combination of all of these things that we've said. And the last thing that we have to say as a motive is what I refer to as just scratching an old itch. Because if he was already a serial killer, there's your motive.
And also what you tend to see is that these, they call them pathologies, don't they? They sort of get worse and worse over time. And what we had seen with his relationships is that they had got really bad, and that he was taking it out on his ex-partners and also even sex workers. I think there was a sex worker in the 80s that had basically accused him of being violent and aggressive as well. So it just exacerbated up and up. And I think you're totally right. It might not have even started in 1999. It might have started earlier than that, and there'll be other victims. But much like all of these stories, that it's a group of a lot of different things. The last thing I'll mention is obviously he had a breakdown in his own personal relationship. You know, with Patricia, they were on ships in the night, as we said. They weren't sexual. He admitted that, and she admitted that afterwards as well. And so it's another element of it as well.
It's a strange, strange case, which you'd normally think would be one that might leave us with more questions than answers. But I feel like with the fact that there's charges hanging over him, we might start to get some more answers. Unfortunately, it will come with a whole heap more questions. One thing we do know for sure is that this was a case that has been suggested to us heavily from you guys, and most importantly from our members. You can become a member by clicking the link in the description, and that is your chance to have your own print on this channel, because the last 12 cases, I want to say, that we've covered have all been membership suggestions. So being a member obviously means that you're able to interact with myself and Josh. By doing so, you're able to tell us about cases, maybe cases that are really, really interesting, but never got the sort of mainstream media attention and we didn't know about perhaps, and therefore you can have your own print on this channel. So hit the link in the description if you want to become a member to the channel. You also get all of our uploads up to 48 hours before they're released to the general public. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of another video. As Josh said right at the beginning of the video, we hope that this didn't bring up any trauma for anyone, and you know, everyone was able to just digest this bit of content for the reason that it was intended for.
Yeah, so thank you so much to every single one of you that has watched. Our deepest sympathies go out to all of the families, friends and victims that were implicated in this case. If you do want to watch another episode from us, why don't you check out the Noah Donahue case? It was a case that we found fascinating. That's on the top link, and below that is a video that YouTube recommends. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.